"There's a fire in your walls, sir. Right now." The voice was thin and shaking, and it came through the shattered kitchen window of the Whitmore estate at 2:03 in the morning, riding on a cold draft and the faint, sweet smell of gas that had been collecting inside the house for the last 17 minutes. The voice belonged to a boy who was, at that moment, already halfway through the broken window, cutting his palm open on a tooth of glass he had not seen in the dark, and bleeding onto the white marble of a kitchen island that had cost more than every place he had ever slept in his entire life combined. 2 stories above him, Harold Whitmore slept on his back the way he had slept for 63 of his 71 years. His silver hair was combed flat against the pillow even in sleep. His left hand rested on the duvet over his chest. His right hand rested on the empty side of the bed, where his wife had slept for 39 years before the cancer took her in the spring. He was dreaming about a horse he had owned in 1974, a chestnut mare named Constance who had thrown him twice and forgiven him both times. He was smiling slightly in the dream. He did not yet know that the gas line that ran behind the wall at the head of his bed had been rerouted, very carefully and over the course of 3 weekend afternoons, by a man who had grown up in this house and knew exactly which walls were hollow and which were not. The boy on the kitchen floor was named Malik. He was 8 years old. He weighed 41 pounds. A stranger looking at his face in good light would have guessed 6, because the kind of hunger Malik had lived inside for the last 14 months tends to keep a child small in a particular and recognizable way. He wore a thin red hoodie with no shirt underneath. He wore jeans that had been a man's jeans once and had been cut down with a kitchen knife and cinched at his waist with a length of orange baling twine. His sneakers had no laces. His left cheek was streaked with dried mud from sleeping, an hour earlier, against the root of a sycamore tree in the small wooded ravine that ran along the back of the Whitmore estate. He had climbed the 8-foot iron fence at the rear of the property at 1:56. He had run across a lawn mowed in perfect diagonal stripes. He had stood on the slate step at the kitchen door, and he had found the kitchen door locked, and he had stood there for 1/2 second thinking about a grandmother who had died in 2019 when a gas line behind her stove had cracked, and who had asked a 4-year-old boy named Malik what that sweet smell was, and the 4-year-old had not known, and the grandmother had not believed her own nose, and she had died. He had stopped thinking about that, and he had picked up the heavy ceramic planter beside the step, and he had thrown it through the kitchen window. Now he was inside. He pressed the cut on his palm against the front of his hoodie without looking at it, because looking at blood tended to make him slower, and slow was the one thing he could not be tonight. He moved through the kitchen on the balls of his feet. He did not call out. Calling out was something a boy could do in a house where he had been invited. He had not been invited. The smell of gas was thicker in the hallway than it had been by the window. He could feel it in the back of his throat, soft and sweet, the way a cough drop is sweet. His grandmother's house had smelled exactly like this in the hour before it went up. He found the stairs. He went up them 2 at a time. He did not know which bedroom was the right bedroom. He guessed correctly that it would be the one at the far end of the upstairs hall, because rich men, in his experience, slept as far from their front doors as their houses would let them. He pushed the door open with his bloody palm. The man on the bed did not stir. Malik crossed the carpet. He did not have words ready. He had run all the way up the slope and over the fence and across the lawn and up the stairs without putting a single sentence together in his head, because sentences cost time, and time was what the man on the bed did not have. He reached the bed. He put his small, bloody hand on the silver-haired man's shoulder, and he shook him hard, the way his grandmother had shaken him awake on school mornings before the fire. The man's eyes opened. For one long second, the two of them looked at each other in the dim blue of a bedside clock that read 2:04 a.m., a silver-haired millionaire in monogrammed pajamas, on his back, half inside a dream about a horse. A muddy-cheeked boy in a red hoodie, bleeding from his right palm with his left hand still gripping the man's shoulder. "There's a fire in your walls, sir," Malik said again, quieter this time because he was close enough now that he did not need to shout. "Right now. We have to go now." Harold Whitmore had been woken in the middle of the night exactly 4 times in the previous decade. Once by a phone call telling him his wife's scan results had come back. Once by a phone call telling him his wife had stopped breathing. Once by a hailstorm that had taken out the skylight above the upstairs library. And once in 2017, by a security guard at the front gate who had mistaken a deer for an intruder and had called the house before checking the camera. Each of those 4 times, Harold had come fully awake inside 3 seconds, because a man who runs a company with 11,000 employees learns, eventually, to keep a small, clean room in the back of his mind where he can stand up and put on his shoes before the rest of him has finished waking. He came awake now inside 2 seconds. He did not say what. He did not say, "Who are you?" He did not say, "How did you get in this house?" He looked at the small boy with the bleeding hand and the muddy cheek and the red hoodie, and he looked at the boy's eyes, which were the eyes of a person telling the truth. And then he smelled for the first time what the boy was smelling, and the small, cold room in the back of his mind opened its door and stepped forward. "Show me," he said. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. He did not reach for his slippers because the boy had said now, and Harold Whitmore had learned, in 71 years of being a man people listened to, that when a frightened child uses the word now, the cost of asking him to say it twice is sometimes a life. He stood. He took his reading glasses off the nightstand and put them in the pocket of his pajama shirt, because his reading glasses were the only thing in the bedroom that mattered to him, and even then only because his wife had picked out the frames. He took Malik by the shoulder gently, the way a grandfather takes a grandson by the shoulder, and he turned him toward the door. "Walk in front of me," he said. "Not fast, steady. If you smell it getting stronger, you tell me and we change direction. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "What's your name?" "Malik." "Malik, I'm going to thank you properly in about 10 minutes. Right now I am going to ask you to keep walking." They went down the hall together. Harold's bare feet made almost no sound on the runner. Malik's sneakers, which had no laces, slapped softly against the soles of his small, dirty feet. At the top of the stairs, Harold stopped. He had lived in this house for 44 years. He knew the sound of it the way a sailor knows the sound of his own boat. And the house, at this moment, was making a sound it should not have been making. It was a low sound, almost below hearing, a soft, continuous whisper coming from inside the wall to the left of the staircase, where the gas line ran from the basement up to the second-floor furnace. Harold had not heard that sound in this house ever before, but he had heard it once in 1968 in a chemistry lab at the university, the day before a graduate student named Peter Halloran had been killed when a fitting failed on a Bunsen burner line that had been left open overnight. He had not thought about Peter Halloran in 58 years. He thought about him now. "Down the stairs," Harold said. "Quickly, but do not run." They went down. At the bottom, Harold did not turn toward the front door, which was the door any reasonable person would have used. He turned, instead, toward the side door off the breakfast room, because the side door was the farthest door in the house from the gas main, and because 44 years of living somewhere teaches a man which exit is the right exit on the worst night of his life. They crossed the breakfast room. Harold flipped no light switches. He had read somewhere, a long time ago, that the small spark inside a wall switch was enough to light a room full of gas, and although he was not certain that was still true with modern wiring, he was not in a mood to test it. The side door opened onto a slate patio. The patio opened onto the long, curving driveway that ran down to the white gate at the bottom of the hill. The night air, when it hit Harold's face, was so cold and so clean and so free of that sweet, sickening smell that he understood, for the first time, just how thick the air inside his own house had become. He took one full breath. Then he took Malik by the wrist, gently, and he led him out onto the driveway 50 feet, then 100, then 150, until they were standing on the grass at the curve of the drive with the house behind them and the gate ahead. He turned around to look at the house. That was when he saw the second person in the driveway. The second person was standing about 30 feet away, between Harold and the front door of the house, wearing a pair of navy silk pajamas and a pair of leather slippers that Harold himself had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. His hair was uncombed. His arms were folded across his chest in a posture of waiting. He was 43 years old. His name was Spencer Whitmore. He was Harold's only son. He had not, Harold noticed in the long, slow second before anyone spoke, run out of the house in alarm. He had walked out calmly some time ago, and he had been standing in the driveway waiting. Malik at the end of Harold's wrist went very still. Then Malik raised his small bleeding hand and he pointed straight at Spencer Whitmore, and he said in a voice that was no longer shaking, "That's the man, sir. That's the man who did it. I saw him. In the basement, 3 Saturdays in a row." Spencer Whitmore did not move for a long moment. He stood in his navy pajamas with his arms folded across his chest, and he looked at the small boy at the end of his father's wrist, and his face did the careful work of a face that has been preparing for this conversation, but had expected to have it without a witness. Then he smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind of smile a son gives a father at a funeral. "Dad," he said, "thank God you're out. I came as soon as I smelled it. I was in the guest house. I tried the house phone. It didn't connect. I was about to come in after you." He took one step forward on the gravel, and the gravel made a small, clean sound under his slipper. "Who is this child?" Harold did not answer. He was instead doing a piece of arithmetic in his head, the way he did arithmetic in board meetings when a number on a slide did not match a number he had memorized the night before. The guest house was 400 yards down the slope on the south side of the property. Spencer had moved into the guest house in March after the divorce. The guest house had its own gas line, a small one, fed off the same main that fed the main house. A man living in the guest house, if he had wanted to, could have walked up to the main house on any Saturday afternoon while his father was at the country club, and let himself into the basement with a key he had been given as a teenager, and worked, slowly and unhurriedly, on the run of black iron pipe that fed the second-floor furnace. A man living in the guest house would also, on a night when something was about to happen inside the main house, be the first person to notice the smell, because the wind on this hill at this time of year always blew from the north. Spencer had said I came as soon as I smelled it. Spencer's guest house was south of the main house. The wind tonight was, Harold could feel it now on the side of his face, blowing from the north. The smell of gas leaking inside Harold's bedroom could not, by any natural arrangement of air, have reached Spencer's guest house before it reached anyone else on the property. Harold filed the arithmetic away. He did not show it on his face. "Spencer," he said quietly, "stay where you are. Dad, stay where you are, please." Spencer's smile did not move, but something behind it moved, a small adjustment, the way a curtain moves when someone behind it shifts their weight. He glanced down at the boy. He glanced back up at his father. "Dad, this child is bleeding. He's clearly in shock. He's wandered onto the property from God knows where, and he's saying God knows what. Let's get him to a hospital. Let's call the fire department. Let's not stand on the lawn." He paused very carefully. "Whatever he thinks he saw, we can sort it out in the morning." Harold did not look at his son. He looked instead at Malik. He crouched slowly until his knees popped, and he brought his face down to the level of the boy's face. The grass under his bare feet was cold and wet. His pajama trousers were going to be ruined. He noticed neither of these things. "Malik, look at me, not at him, at me." Malik looked. His eyes were the size of small coins. "I want you to tell me exactly what you saw. I am not going to interrupt you. I am not going to ask you to prove it. Just tell me, slowly." The boy swallowed. The cut on his palm had opened again where he had pointed, and a thin line of blood was running down the inside of his wrist toward his elbow. He did not seem to notice it. "3 Saturdays ago," he said, "I was in the woods behind the wall. I sleep there sometimes. I saw a car coming through the small gate at the back, the one where the gardener parks his truck. It was his car." He did not point this time, he just said his. "He had a bag, a canvas bag." He went in through the basement door, the one under the kitchen window. He stayed inside for about 2 hours. I know because my watch said 4:18 when he went in, and it said 6:12 when he came out. He came out with the bag, and the bag was lighter because I watched how he carried it. He locked the door behind him, and he drove back out through the gardener's gate. He took a breath. He came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. The third time, 2 weeks ago, the basement window was open a little bit, the small one by the rose bush. I went down there after he left. I was hungry, and I thought maybe in a basement there is sometimes food. There wasn't food. There were pipes, the black pipes that go up the wall. One of them had been cut, and a new piece had been put in, but it wasn't tight. It was loose, sir. I could hear the air whisper in it. I could smell the sweet smell just a little. I knew that smell because my grandmother. His voice caught. He swallowed it down. I knew that smell. Harold was very still. "Why did you not come tell someone, Malik?" The boy looked at him. There was no resentment in the look. There was only the patient, ancient, weary expression of a child who has already learned by 8 how the world responds to children like him. "Sir," he said, "who would have believed me?" Behind them, somewhere inside the walls of the great dark house, the soft whisper of the loose fitting was now joined by a second sound, a low, almost musical hum, the sound a gas line makes when the pressure inside it has been climbing for a long time. Harold stood up. He took the boy's small, good hand in his own, firmly, the way a man takes the hand of someone he intends not to let go of, and he turned them both slowly to face his son in the driveway. Spencer Whitmore had not moved during the boy's account. He had kept his arms folded, his shoulders square, his head slightly tilted, in the patient, receptive posture of a man listening to a piece of bad news he had already heard and was now hearing again for the benefit of someone else in the room. It was a posture Harold knew well. He had taught it to his son himself, 25 years earlier, in a glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor of the Whitmore Tower, the day Spencer had joined the company as a junior associate. When a person is telling you something you do not want to hear, Harold had said, let them finish. The one who interrupts is the one who looks guilty. Spencer had remembered the lesson. He had remembered it too well. "Dad," Spencer said quietly when Malik had stopped speaking. "You cannot be serious." Harold did not answer. He was instead taking a slow inventory of the driveway in front of him. He was noting that his son was wearing slippers but no robe on a November night when the temperature on the hill was 38 degrees. He was noting that his son's hair, which had been described as uncombed, was in fact uncombed in a very specific way, flattened on the right side as though slept on, but standing up on the left side as though raked through by a nervous hand. He was noting that his son's pajama collar was buttoned correctly to the top, which was the way Spencer had buttoned his pajamas as a child, and not the way a man buttons his pajamas when he has scrambled out of bed at 2 in the morning because he smelled smoke. He was noting that his son's car, a silver coupe, was not parked at the guest house, where it should have been. It was parked at the top of the drive near the front of the house, where a man would park if he intended to leave quickly. "Spencer," Harold said, "walk down the drive to the gate slowly. I want you on the other side of the gate when the fire department arrives." "Dad, walk. Dad, listen to me." Spencer took one step forward, just one. "Whatever this child has told you, he is wrong. He is confused. He has been sleeping in the woods, for God's sake, look at him. He is barely conscious. Whatever he thinks he saw in the basement, he saw a contractor. I had Bill out 3 weeks ago to look at the hot water heater. You remember, you signed the invoice." Another half step, very small. "Dad, please, I know things have been hard between us this year. I know you are about to file something on Monday. I know what is in that filing. I have known about it for 3 weeks. But you cannot honestly believe that I would, that I could." He let the sentence stop where it had stopped, the way a man stops a sentence when he is counting on the other man to finish it in his head. Harold finished it in his head. He finished it with the words, "Kill my own father." He let those words sit in the cold air between them for a long moment. Then he reached with his free hand into the pocket of his pajama shirt, and he took out his reading glasses and he put them on slowly, the way an old man puts on his glasses when he wants to see a thing more clearly. He looked at his son through the glasses. "You knew about the filing," he said. It was not a question. It was the closing of a small, clean door inside his chest. Spencer's face did not change, but his hands did. His arms came unfolded, and his hands moved very slightly to a position at his sides where the fingers were no longer relaxed. They were curled, just slightly. "Dad, I had not told you about the filing, Spencer. I had not told anyone except Margaret and the 2 attorneys in her office who drafted it. Margaret was instructed on Tuesday to keep it sealed until Monday morning. There is no version of this story in which you knew about that filing 3 weeks ago." Harold's voice was very quiet. It carried easily in the cold air. "You knew about it because you have someone inside Margaret's office, or because you have someone inside this house, or both." Spencer said nothing. "Spencer, walk to the gate. Dad, you are going to embarrass yourself. Walk to the gate." Behind them, very faintly, Harold heard the low hum from inside the wall change pitch. It climbed half a tone, the way a kettle climbs half a tone in the last moment before the whistle. He did not turn around to look at the house. He kept his eyes on his son. He had been a man who watched faces for 50 years, and he knew that the only thing on the property right now that could still be reasoned with was the face in front of him, and only for another few seconds. Malik, at Harold's side, tugged once on his hand. A small, urgent tug. "Sir," Malik whispered, "we need to be farther away." Spencer heard him. Spencer looked at the small boy with the bloody hand for one long second, and something in Spencer's face, the careful, arranged thing that had been holding it together, slipped half an inch to the side. It was not anger that came through the slip. It was not even fear. It was something colder than either of those. The bare, unguarded look of a man who has just understood that his entire plan had not accounted for one variable, and that the variable was 8 years old and wearing a hoodie with no shirt underneath. Harold saw the look. Harold had been a father long enough to know what it meant. "Margaret," he said aloud to no one because his phone was upstairs on a nightstand inside a house that was about to come apart. "I am going to need you here in 40 minutes. Then he tightened his grip on Malik's small hand, and he turned them both, and he began to walk, quickly now but still not running, toward the white gate at the bottom of the drive with his back to his son for the first time in 43 years. They had made it perhaps 40 yards down the drive when the house went. It did not explode the way a house explodes in a film. It did not lift off its foundation in a ball of orange. The gas had been leaking for nearly 20 minutes by then, but it had been leaking into the wall cavities and the basement and the attic crawl space, not into the open rooms, and the rooms themselves had been ventilated just enough by an old house's natural drafts to keep the mixture in most of the house, below the threshold a flame could catch. So what happened when it happened was smaller and more particular, and in its own quiet way, more terrible. The wall behind the kitchen, the one Malik had cut his palm on, blew outward in a single soft whump that sounded, from 40 yards away, like a heavy book being dropped on a hardwood floor. A long jet of pale blue flame followed it, leaning sideways into the cold air, almost gentle, almost beautiful. The flame hit the dry pine trees that bordered the kitchen wing, and the pine trees, which had not been watered since the summer drought and were standing in their own carpet of dead needles, went up in 3 seconds with the dry, crackling roar of a thing that had been waiting a long time to burn. Harold did not look back. He had been counting his steps in his head, and he had counted to 52, and at 52 the heat hit the back of his neck like an open oven door, and he pulled Malik against the side of his hip and bent over the boy, and he kept walking. Spencer was no longer behind them. Harold did not know exactly when Spencer had stopped following, because Harold had stopped looking at his son the moment he had turned away. He would learn later that Spencer had run for the silver coupe at the top of the drive, and that the silver coupe had not started, because Margaret Chen had, at 1:41 that morning, on a hunch she had been unable to explain even to herself, called the security firm that monitored the Whitmore estate, and asked them to put a quiet hold on every vehicle registered to anyone in the Whitmore family, until she gave them the all-clear. The security firm, which was paid a great deal of money to act on Margaret Chen's hunches without asking questions, had remotely disabled the ignition on 3 vehicles at 1:47. The silver coupe had been one of them. Spencer was, at the moment the wall came apart, standing next to a car that would not start in his slippers with his hand on the door handle. Harold reached the white gate. He pressed his palm against the small black keypad set into the stone column. The keypad lit up. He typed 4 digits, his wife's birthday, the same 4 digits he had typed every day for 39 years and had not changed in the 7 months since she had died because changing them had felt like erasing her. And the great iron gate, 10 feet tall and made of the same wrought iron as the fence Malik had climbed earlier that night, began to swing open with the slow, patient hum of expensive machinery. Harold did not wait for it to finish opening. He stepped through the gap as soon as it was wide enough for both of them. He pulled Malik through. He turned finally and looked back. The kitchen wing of the house was a column of orange. The fire had jumped from the pine trees to the cedar shake roof, and the roof, which had been replaced in 1997 with shingles that the contractor had sworn were fire-rated, and which, like many things contractors swear was less than entirely true, was now feeding the fire upward. The bedroom Harold had been sleeping in 12 minutes earlier was, at this moment, no longer there. The window his wife had once spent an entire summer choosing curtains for was a black square inside a frame of flame. 40 feet up the drive, Spencer Whitmore was running back toward the gate. He was running unevenly because he was running in slippers on gravel. He was shouting something. The shouting did not carry over the sound of the fire. Harold pulled Malik a few more yards down the road, past the gate, past the stone column, until they were standing on the far side of the road on the strip of grass between the asphalt and the drainage ditch. He crouched again. He took Malik by both shoulders gently, and he turned the boy so the boy's back was to the burning house so the boy would not have to watch. "Malik." "Yes, sir." "You are bleeding. You are bleeding more than I think you realize. I'm going to take off my pajama shirt and I am going to wrap your hand. I am going to do it tightly. It will hurt. I am sorry." "Okay, sir." Harold unbuttoned the pajama shirt slowly because his fingers were shaking and he did not want the boy to see them shake. He took the shirt off. He was underneath wearing a thin cotton undershirt, the kind men of his generation still wore under their pajamas, and the cold air bit through it at once. He did not notice. He folded the pajama shirt into a long strip, the way a soldier folds a field bandage, and he wrapped the strip around Malik's small bleeding palm 3 times and tied it off at the wrist with a knot he had learned at 13 on a fishing boat with his father, who had been dead now for 26 years. He looked at his work. The shirt had been white. It was already going pink at the center. "Sir," Malik said quietly, "your house." Harold looked over his shoulder. The whole north wing was gone now. The fire had crossed the central hall and was working on the south wing. He watched the library window, the one with the curved glass his wife had ordered from Belgium in 1992, go orange and then white and then black. He felt distantly the way a man feels a thing in the chest when the thing is too large to feel properly yet, that an entire 44-year-old room of his life had just ended. He turned back to the boy. "Yes," he said, "my house." And then, in the soft, strange voice of a man who has just understood something he had not understood 5 minutes earlier, he added, "But not the part that mattered. That part is standing right in front of me." The first siren came up the hill at 2:19 in the morning. The fire engine came around the last bend in the road with its headlights cutting across the trees, and behind it, separated by perhaps 100 yards, came a second engine, and behind the second engine, 2 police cruisers. They had been called, Harold would learn later, not by him and not by Spencer and not by any neighbor on the hill, but by the alarm company that monitored the Whitmore estate, which had registered a sudden catastrophic temperature spike in the kitchen sensor at 2:06, and had, per its protocol, dispatched both fire and police automatically without waiting for a confirmatory phone call. The first engine stopped at the open gate. The captain, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache, swung down from the cab and took in the scene in the way men in his profession learn to take in scenes, which is to say in pieces, very fast, without expression. He saw the house. He saw the trees. He saw an old man in a thin cotton undershirt standing on the grass on the far side of the road with a small, bleeding boy. He saw up the driveway behind the open gate a younger man in pajamas standing very still beside a silver coupe. He walked first to Harold. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "Yes." "Anyone else inside?" "No." "You sure?" "I am sure. Staff, family, anyone. My son is up the drive. He was in the guest house. He is out." The captain looked up the drive at Spencer. He looked back at Harold. He looked at the boy. He looked at Harold's pajama shirt, which was wrapped around the boy's hand and was no longer pink but red. "This child needs a paramedic. We have one in the second engine. I am going to call her down. I am also going to ask you to stay exactly where you are standing and not move from this spot until one of my officers takes a statement. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Sir, are you injured?" "No." "Are you sure?" Harold thought about the question. He thought about it for a longer moment than the captain had expected him to. Then he said, "I am sure that I am not burned. I am not sure about the rest of it, but that is not your problem tonight." The captain looked at him for 1 second more. Then he nodded once and turned and started barking orders at the men coming off the second engine. A paramedic in a navy jacket reached them within the minute. She was a small woman with her hair in a tight braid, and she crouched in front of Malik the way Harold had crouched, which Harold noticed and approved of. She introduced herself as Renata. She asked Malik if she could look at his hand. Malik looked up at Harold first, the way a child looks up at the adult who is currently in charge of him, and Harold nodded, and Malik held out his wrapped hand. Renata unwrapped the pajama shirt slowly. She made a small sound in her throat when she saw the cut, the sound a professional makes when a thing is worse than they had hoped but not as bad as they had feared. The cut ran across the heel of the palm from the base of the thumb almost to the wrist. It was deep. It would need stitches. It was not, she said quietly to Harold over the top of Malik's head, going to take a tendon. Harold understood that she was telling him this so he would not have to ask. "Malik," Renata said, "I am going to clean this and put a real bandage on it right here, and then I am going to ask you to come with me to the truck so we can do a few more things. Is that all right with you?" "Yes, ma'am. And your friend here is going to come too, because I don't think he is going anywhere without you tonight. Is that right?" Malik looked up at Harold a second time. Harold's eyes, behind the reading glasses he had still not taken off, did a small, surprising thing. They filled. He did not let the filling become anything more than a filling because he was a man of 71 years who had learned, in the 7 months since his wife had died, how to keep a face in its assigned position. But the filling was there, and Malik, who at 8 had become a careful reader of adult faces, saw it. "Yes, ma'am," Malik said. "He is going to come too." A police officer arrived at Harold's elbow a moment later. She was younger than the fire captain, perhaps 30, and she had her notebook already open. She introduced herself as Officer Dolly. She asked Harold if he was prepared to give a preliminary statement. Harold said he was. She asked him to describe what had happened in his own words. Harold described it. He described being woken by a small boy. He described the smell. He described walking out of the side door. He described the sound inside the wall of the staircase. He described, more slowly, finding his son in the driveway in pajamas and slippers, with the silver coupe parked at the top of the drive. He described, slower still, the fact that his son had referenced a sealed legal filing that his son was not supposed to know existed. He described what Malik had told him about 3 Saturdays in the basement. Officer Dolly wrote without looking down at her notebook. When he had finished, she said very quietly, "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be careful here. I am hearing you describe a possible arson with intent to commit homicide, and I am hearing you identify your son as the suspect. Before I take that any further, I am required to ask you, are you certain?" Harold did not hesitate. "Officer, I am 71 years old. I have made many decisions in my life that I was not certain about. This is not one of them. My son knew about a filing that no one outside my attorney's office could have known about. My son was standing in the driveway in pajamas when the boy and I came out of the house on the wrong side of the wind, which means he was outside before the smell could have reached the guest house. His car was parked at the top of the drive, not down at the guest house where he sleeps. And he has, since I came out of that house, told 2 small lies and 1 large one. I am certain. She wrote that down also. Then I am going to ask you to come to the station with me in about 30 minutes once the paramedic has cleared the boy. I am going to ask you not to speak to your son before then. Is that understood? Yes. Up the driveway, behind the open gate, Spencer Whitmore was sitting now on the ground beside the silver coupe with his head in his hands. A second officer was standing near him, not touching him, just standing, the way a man stands near another man who has not yet been told that he is no longer free to leave. Harold looked at him for a long moment. He did not feel hate. He had expected, somewhere in the back of his mind during the walk down the drive, to feel hate when this moment came. He did not. He felt instead a vast quiet sorrow, the sorrow of a father looking at a 43-year-old son and seeing, underneath the silver in the son's hair and the lines around the son's eyes, a 6-year-old boy who had once climbed into his lap on a Sunday afternoon with a picture book about horses. He turned away. He put his hand on Malik's good shoulder. The two of them, the old man in the undershirt and the small boy with the freshly bandaged hand, walked together toward the second fire engine, where Renata was waiting with the door open. The inside of the second engine was warm in a way that surprised Malik. He had spent enough nights outdoors in the last 14 months to have developed strong opinions about warmth, and he had expected the inside of a fire truck to be the cold metal interior of a working machine. It was not. There was a small heater built into the wall of the equipment bay, and Renata had turned it on the moment she had brought him aboard, and the air, when Malik climbed up onto the long bench seat, was the temperature of a living room in winter. He had not been inside a living room in winter in 14 months. Renata wrapped a silver foil blanket around his shoulders before she asked him a single question about his hand. She did it without comment, the way a person does a thing she has done 1,000 times, and Malik understood that she had done this for many small, cold boys before him, and that the silver blanket was not a special kindness aimed at him in particular, but rather a piece of standard equipment used on every small, cold person who came through that door. He found, to his surprise, that knowing this did not make the blanket feel less kind. It made it feel more kind because a kindness that was waiting for him in a truck before anyone knew his name was, he thought, the better kind of kindness. Harold sat on the bench beside him. Renata had not asked Harold to come in. She had also not asked him not to. She was, Malik had noticed, a careful reader of which adult belonged with which child. "Malik," she said, "I am going to clean this cut now. It is going to sting. I am going to count to 3 and then I am going to do it." 1, 2, 3, she did it. Malik did not make a sound, although his eyes watered and he bit down very hard on the inside of his cheek. Renata noticed both the eyes and the cheek. She did not comment on either. "Good," she said when she was finished. "Very good. Now I am going to do the stitches. I am going to numb you first. The needle for the numbing is the worst part. After that, you will not feel the stitches. I want you to know that going in." "Okay, ma'am. And while I am working your friend here, what is your name, sir?" "Harold. Harold here is going to tell you a story about anything, about a horse, about a baseball game, about a meal he had once. He's going to talk the whole time. That is his job. Is that all right?" Harold cleared his throat. He had not in 71 years been assigned a job by a paramedic in the back of a fire engine at 2:30 in the morning. He found that he did not mind. "Malik," Harold said, "have I told you about the horse?" "No, sir. Her name was Constance. I bought her in 1974 at an auction in Kentucky. I was 20 years old and I had no business owning a horse. I knew nothing about horses. I had read one book. The book had been written in 1908 and most of what it said was wrong. Constance was a chestnut mare, 4 years old, 16 hands tall, and she had a white star between her eyes the size of a silver dollar. Renata had begun on the numbing. Malik flinched at the first stick and then went still. Harold kept talking. "She threw me twice. The first time was the second day I had her. I had not learned yet that you do not approach a horse from directly in front, because a horse cannot see what is directly in front of it. I walked up to her with an apple held out in my hand. She could not see the apple. She could only see a young man walking straight at her face with his arm raised. She did what any reasonable horse would do. She reared. I went over backwards into a fence. I cracked 2 ribs. The apple rolled under the stall door, and Constance, who had been able to see it once it was on the ground, ate it through the gap. The second time was 3 months later. I had learned by then how to approach her. I had not learned how to ride her properly in heavy rain. We were in a field about a mile from the barn when a thunderstorm came in faster than I had estimated. The first crack of thunder went off directly over us. Constance reared again. I came off again. This time I broke my left wrist on a rock. Constance, having thrown me, did not run home. She stood in the rain with her head down over me for 45 minutes until my father came looking. My father said later that he had never seen a horse do that for a person who had not earned it, and that I had not earned it, and that the horse was a better judge of character than I was. Malik made a small sound that, in a boy who had not been allowed to laugh in a long time, was the start of a laugh. I kept her for 19 years. She forgave me everything I ever did wrong. I do not believe, in the 71 years I have lived on this earth, that I have ever been forgiven for that many things by any other living creature, two-legged or four-legged. What happened to her? Malik asked. She got old. She got old the way good horses get old, slowly, with dignity, and she stopped being able to carry weight, and then she stopped being able to walk. And then one morning in 1993 I sat with her in her stall for 4 hours, and the vet came at noon, and I held her head and she went. I'm sorry, sir. Thank you, Malik. It was a long time ago, but thank you. Renata tied off the last stitch. 8, she said quietly. All in, you did beautifully, both of you. She began to wrap a clean white bandage around Malik's hand. The bandage was thicker than the pajama shirt had been and softer, and it stayed white. She looked up at Harold. Her eyes did a small, careful thing. Mr. Whitmore, the boy is medically stable. He has lost some blood, but not a dangerous amount. The cut would have closed on its own eventually, but he would have carried a scar that limited his hand. He will not now. The bigger issue is that he is significantly underweight. He is hypothermic on the borderline, and he is, by his own account in the truck just now, currently unhoused. Officer Dolly is going to need to know that. There will be a social worker involved before sunrise. I am telling you this so you are not surprised. Harold did not answer right away. He looked at Malik. Malik was looking at the floor of the truck. The silver blanket had slipped from one of his shoulders, and Harold reached over and pulled it back into place without thinking. Renata, Harold said quietly, who do I call to make sure that this boy is not tonight taken anywhere that he does not want to be taken? Renata looked at him. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you are not his guardian. You have known him for, 45 minutes? I am aware. Then I am going to tell you the honest answer, which is that the social worker who comes will make her own determination, and there is nothing you or I can do to override her. But there is one thing you can do tonight that will matter to her in the morning, and that is to be the adult who stays in the room with him from this moment until she arrives, and to not leave that room for any reason. And to make it very clear to her when she gets there that you are not asking to take him home, you are asking to be the person who sits with him until his grandfather is found. Harold blinked. His grandfather, Renata nodded at Malik. He told me while you were giving your statement to Dolly. He has a grandfather. The grandfather works nights at a warehouse on Industrial Avenue. The grandfather does not know yet that his grandson has been sleeping in your woods for the past 3 weeks, because the grandson has been telling him he is staying with a friend from school. There is no friend from school. There has not been a friend from school since the apartment was lost in September. Harold was very quiet. Find the grandfather, he said. I have already given his name to Dolly. She is making the call now. Harold reached out slowly, and he put his hand lightly on the back of Malik's small head. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Malik leaned just slightly into the hand, the way a tired animal leans into a thing that is warm. Margaret Chen arrived at 3:11 in the morning. She came up the hill in the back of a black car driven by a man Harold did not recognize, which meant the man was new and had been vetted by Margaret personally, because Margaret did not allow any driver near Harold who had not been background checked by a firm in Virginia she had used for 19 years. The car stopped at the gate, which was now closed again and ringed by yellow tape. A young officer at the tape lifted a hand to wave the car off. The young officer then saw who was in the back seat, and he lifted the tape instead. Margaret got out of the car. She was wearing a cream blouse and black trousers and a long charcoal coat, and her hair, which she had not had time to do, was pulled back with a plain black band. She walked past the smoldering remains of the north wing of the Whitmore estate without looking at it, because Margaret did not waste her attention on things that could no longer be helped. She walked toward the second fire engine, where she had been told on the phone that her client was sitting. She climbed into the back of the truck without asking permission. She took in the scene in 2 seconds. Harold in his undershirt with a silver blanket around his own shoulders now, because Renata had eventually insisted. Malik beside him in the larger silver blanket, with a clean white bandage on his hand and the beginnings of color in his cheeks. Renata in the far corner packing equipment. Margaret sat down on the bench across from them. She looked at Malik first, not at Harold. Hello, she said. My name is Margaret. I am Mr. Whitmore's lawyer. What is your name? Malik, ma'am. Malik, that is a very good name. May I shake your good hand? Yes, ma'am. She shook it. She did it gravely, with her full attention, the way she would have shaken the hand of a senior partner at a firm in London. Malik, who had never had his hand shaken by an adult before, sat up half an inch straighter on the bench. Then she looked at Harold. Tell me, Harold told her. He told her in the short, clean sentences he had been telling things in for the last 50 years of working with Margaret Chen. The smell, the boy, the walk, the driveway, Spencer in pajamas on the wrong side of the wind, the reference to the filing, the car parked at the top of the drive, the 3 Saturdays in the basement. The rerouted line, the pine trees, the bedroom that was no longer there. Margaret listened without interrupting once. When he had finished, she said, "Where is Spencer?" "In the back of the second cruiser. They have not arrested him yet. They are waiting for the fire marshal to confirm the cause. The fire marshal will confirm the cause in about 40 minutes because the basement is going to tell him everything he needs to know. Spencer will be in custody by sunrise." "I know." "Harold, yes. I need you to listen to me very carefully now because the next 90 minutes are going to determine the next 90 years of this family, and I need your head clear." "My head is clear." "Good, then hear me. There's going to be a press call by 10 this morning. The fire was visible from 6 neighborhoods. The cars at the gate include 2 engines and 3 cruisers and a fire marshal's truck. 2 helicopters have already passed overhead. The story is going to be on every screen in the city by noon. You do not control whether the story exists. You control only one thing, which is what is in it. So I am going to ask you a question, and your answer will tell me what to do." "Ask. Do you want the boy in the story?" Harold did not answer right away. He looked at Malik. Malik was leaning against him now. The boy had not meant to fall asleep. Harold understood, but the warmth of the truck and the warmth of the blanket and the dropping of the fear had done their work, and Malik's head had come to rest against the side of Harold's arm somewhere around the part about the silver coupe, and Malik's breathing had slowed, and Malik was, at this moment, asleep against him. Harold did not move his arm. "No," he said. "I do not want the boy in the story." Margaret nodded once. "Then he will not be in it. He will be referred to in the official statement as a young witness whose identity is being protected. The fire department will not name him. The police department will not name him. The 2 reporters who have already arrived at the bottom of the hill will be reminded, in a phone call I will make in about 6 minutes, that their press passes for the courthouse depend on their not nomming him. He will not be photographed." His grandfather, whom Officer Dolly reached at the warehouse on Industrial Avenue at 253, will be told what has happened in private, in a room at the precinct, with a social worker and with me present before any reporter knows the boy exists. His grandfather. Coming. They sent a car for him. His shift ends at 6, but his supervisor released him when Officer Dolly called. He should be at the precinct in about 30 minutes. What is his name? Joseph Brown. 64 years old. Widowed. Worked the same warehouse for 19 years. Raised his daughter alone after her mother died, and raised this boy alone after his daughter died of an overdose in 2022. Lost the apartment in September when the warehouse cut his hours after a back injury. Has been staying since then on a friend's couch on the south side. The friend has a 1-bedroom apartment and a wife and 3 children, and there was no room for Malik. Malik did not tell his grandfather this. Malik told his grandfather he had a friend from school. Joseph Brown will learn tonight at the precinct that there was no friend from school. He will learn it from me because I am going to be the one who tells him. Harold closed his eyes for a moment. Margaret, yes. How quickly can you find an apartment? For the grandfather and the boy? Yes. By noon. There is a 2-bedroom on Maple Street that one of my paralegals has been holding for a different client whose closing fell through last week. It is clean, it is furnished. It is 2 blocks from a good elementary school, and the rent has already been paid through January. I will move them in this afternoon if Joseph Brown agrees. He may not agree. He may not. He is a proud man. He has spent 19 years not asking anyone for anything. I will not push him. I will offer it as a loan, not a gift, with terms he can refuse if he chooses. If he refuses, we will find another way. Margaret, yes. How long have you been my attorney? 26 years. In 26 years, have I ever once told you that you are the best thing that ever happened to this family? Margaret looked at him. Her face did not change, but the corner of her mouth, which almost never moved, moved. You have not, she said, but I will accept the late delivery. In the warm, small space of the back of the fire engine, with the smell of smoke still drifting through the half-open door and the first gray light of a November morning beginning very faintly to come up behind the hills, Harold Whitmore put his free hand over his face for a long moment, and he did not let himself cry, because the boy was asleep against his other arm, and he had decided, some hours earlier, that he was not going to be the kind of man who woke that boy. Joseph Brown arrived at the precinct at 3:47 in the morning. He was a tall, thin man, taller than Harold by half a head, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of long, careful hands that had spent 19 years moving boxes off a conveyor belt without dropping any of them. He wore a heavy canvas work jacket and the same blue work pants he had pulled on at 9 the night before. He had a thermos of coffee in his left hand that he had been carrying when his supervisor had told him to leave, and he had not, in the hour since, remembered to put it down. The thermos had gone cold. Margaret met him in the lobby. She introduced herself. She asked him to come with her into a small private room down a side hallway. She did not say in the lobby anything about why he was there, because she had learned a long time ago that the lobby of a police station was a place where a grandfather should not be given news. In the small room, with the door closed and the blinds drawn and a paper cup of fresh coffee in front of him that he had not asked for, and that he also did not touch, Joseph Brown listened to Margaret Chen tell him what his grandson had done that night. He listened without moving. He did not interrupt. His eyes, which were a darker brown than Malik's eyes but had the same particular steadiness, did not leave Margaret's face. When she had finished, he sat for a long moment, and then he asked very quietly the only question that mattered to him. "Where is he?" "He is in the family lounge at the end of this hallway. He is asleep on a couch. There is a paramedic checking on him every 15 minutes. There is also an older gentleman in the room with him. The owner of the house. He has refused to leave the boy's side since 2:30 this morning. He has said he will leave the moment you arrive and not before. Take me to him. Mr. Brown, take me to him, please." Margaret stood. She led him down the hall. She opened the door of the family lounge softly, the way a person opens a door behind which a child is sleeping. Joseph Brown stepped inside. The lounge was a small room with a couch and 2 chairs, and a table with a coffee pot that no one had touched. Malik was curled on the couch under a thin blue blanket the precinct kept in a cabinet for nights like this one. The silver foil blanket had been folded and placed on the back of the couch behind his head, the way a man folds and sets aside a piece of equipment he no longer needs. The clean white bandage on his hand was visible against the blue of the blanket. He was breathing slowly and evenly. He was, for the first time in 14 months, asleep indoors in a room with a door that locked and an adult in it who was paid to make sure no one came in who did not belong. Harold Whitmore was sitting in the chair across from the couch. He had been given a sweatshirt by someone at the precinct. The sweatshirt was gray and 2 sizes too large and had the word police printed across the chest in white block letters, and Harold, who had not worn a sweatshirt in approximately 40 years, was wearing it now without comment. The reading glasses were still in the breast pocket of the undershirt underneath. He had not been able to part with them. He stood up when Joseph Brown came in. The 2 men looked at each other across the small room for a long moment. They had not, before this moment, ever been in a room together. They were, in most measurable ways, men from 2 different planets. The clothes they wore did not cost the same amount of money. The schools they had attended did not exist in the same conversations. The neighborhoods they had grown up in were separated by 20 miles of city and by every law of zoning and lending the city had passed in the last 100 years. In this room, on this morning, none of it mattered. They were 2 old men, one white and one black, both widowed, both responsible for keeping a small boy alive, both of whom had failed at it in their own different ways for their own different reasons until 2 hours ago, a small boy had decided to save them instead. Harold spoke first. "Mr. Brown, sir, I am very sorry." Joseph Brown looked at him. The look went on for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was lower than Margaret had expected, and was, in some way she could not have explained, harder to refuse than a louder voice would have been, "Sir, do not be sorry to me. My grandson is alive. Your house is gone. We are not this morning in equal positions of needing apology. Sit down before you fall down." Harold sat. Joseph Brown walked to the couch. He moved the way a tall man moves when he is trying not to make the floor shake. He crouched beside his grandson. He did not touch the boy. He looked at him for a long, careful moment, the way a man looks at a thing he had been afraid he might never see again. Then he reached out with one long finger and very gently brushed a piece of hair off the boy's forehead. Malik did not wake. Joseph Brown stayed there, crouched beside the couch, for what was probably a minute and felt longer. When he stood, his eyes were wet, but he did not let the wetness be more than wetness. He turned to Harold. "Sir," he said, "the woman your lawyer has offered me an apartment. She has offered it as a loan. She has been very careful about the word loan. I have been a man my whole life who pays his own way. I want you to understand that." "I understand. But I have also been a man my whole life who does what is right for that boy." And what is right for that boy is a bed indoors tonight, and a school 3 blocks away in the morning, and a roof over his grandfather's head so the grandfather can pick up a second shift again and not have to choose between a roof and the boy's shoes. So I am going to say yes to the apartment. As a loan, I will pay it back at a rate we can agree on. I do not need charity. I need a starting line. It is a loan. Then I accept it. Mr. Brown, sir, there is going to be a press call in about 6 hours. Your grandson is not going to be in it. His name is not going to be in it. His face is not going to be in it. My attorney has already made the necessary calls. I want you to hear that from me, not from her, so that you know the decision came from this room. Joseph Brown looked at him for a long beat. Thank you, he said quietly. That was the right decision. It was the only decision. No, sir, there were other decisions available to you. You chose the right one. That is not the same thing. I have spent 64 years watching men in your position choose the other decisions. I will remember that you did not. Harold did not answer. He could not answer. He looked at the floor of the family lounge for a moment, and the floor of the family lounge was a worn industrial tile that had been waxed too many times, and he found, looking at it, that he could keep his face in its assigned position for one more minute. Outside the small window of the lounge, the gray light of morning was coming up properly now over the hills, and the smell of smoke from a place 15 miles away was, faintly, still on the breeze. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, Harold Whitmore parked a rented sedan at the curb of a small 2-bedroom apartment on Maple Street and sat for a long moment with his hands on the steering wheel before he got out. The house on the hill was gone. The insurance adjusters had finished their work. The arson investigation had finished its work. The fire marshal's report, 11 pages of careful technical prose, had concluded what everyone in the small private room at the precinct had already known. The gas line behind the second-floor furnace had been altered by a person with access to the basement and a working knowledge of the house's mechanical systems. The alteration had been made over 3 weekends in October and early November. The person who had made it had been arrested, charged, and was now awaiting trial without bail in a county facility on the east side of the city, represented by an attorney his father was not paying for. Harold had been clear about that. Margaret had been clearer. Harold had not visited his son. He was not sure yet whether he ever would. Margaret had told him not to make the decision now. Margaret had said that some decisions are not for the first month or the second or the 6th. Margaret had said that the only decision required of him this month was to keep getting out of bed in the morning, and that he was doing that, and that the rest could wait. He had been staying in a small, furnished apartment of his own 8 blocks from Maple Street that Margaret had arranged the same afternoon she had arranged the Browns. He had not wanted to go to a hotel. He had not wanted to go to any of the 3 other houses he owned. He had wanted, for reasons he could not quite have explained even to himself, to be within walking distance of the boy. He got out of the car. He carried in his right hand a small paper bag from a bookstore on 8th Street. Inside the bag was a book about horses. It was not the book he had read in 1974. It was a better book, a newer one, written by a woman who had spent 40 years training thoroughbreds in Kentucky and who knew, among other things, the correct way to approach a horse from the side rather than the front. He had also put inside the bag, at the last moment, a small wooden carving of a chestnut mare with a white star between her eyes that he had found at an estate sale the week before and had not been able to leave behind. Joseph Brown opened the door. The apartment behind him smelled like onions and garlic and something braising slowly in a pot. There was a small Christmas tree in the corner of the front room with a string of white lights on it. The tree was not large. It was the right size for the room. There were 3 ornaments on it, and Harold understood, looking at them, that the ornaments had been made by Malik in school in the previous week, because they were paper and they had glitter, and one of them was a small lopsided star with the word Grandpa written across it in careful crayon letters. "Come in, sir," Joseph said. "He has been watching the window for you for an hour." Harold came in. Malik was sitting on the floor in front of the small Christmas tree. He had on a clean blue sweater that fit him properly, and jeans that fit him properly, and a pair of new sneakers with the laces tied. His hair had been freshly trimmed. The cut on his palm had closed into a thin pale line that ran from the base of his thumb to his wrist, and Renata had been correct. It had not taken a tendon, and he was, at this moment, using that same hand to hold a green crayon with which he was drawing on a sheet of paper. He looked up when Harold came in. His face did the small, surprised lighting up that children's faces do when the person they have been waiting for actually arrives, and he scrambled to his feet, and he crossed the room at a run, and he stopped about 3 feet from Harold and looked up at him with the gravity he had carried that night on the gravel of the driveway. "Hello, sir." "Hello, Malik. How is your house?" "My house is gone." "I know, I am sorry." "Thank you, I am building a new one, smaller. Closer to town. Can I see it when it is done?" "You can see it before it is done. You can come with me on Saturday if your grandfather says yes, and we can walk around the empty lot and I can show you where the kitchen will go. The kitchen will be on the south side this time, not the north. I have learned a thing or two about kitchens." Malik nodded solemnly, the way an 8-year-old nods when an adult has told him a true thing. Harold handed him the bag. Malik took it carefully with both hands, the way he had once taken the silver blanket from Renata. He opened it. He took out the book first. He looked at the cover for a long moment, which had on it a photograph of a chestnut mare in a green field at evening. Then he took out the small wooden carving. He held it in his palm. He looked up at Harold. "Is this Constance, sir?" "No," Harold said. "Constance is gone, but this is a horse who looks the way she looked. I thought you might like to have her, to remember the story." Malik closed his small fingers around the wooden horse. He held it against his chest just for a moment. Then he looked up at his grandfather, who was watching from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder, and Joseph Brown nodded once, and Malik turned back to Harold. "Sir," he said, "will you stay for dinner? Grandpa made the rice and chicken. There is a lot." Harold looked at Joseph Brown. Joseph Brown nodded again, slowly, with the careful permission of a man who had thought, 3 weeks ago, that he would never invite a stranger to his table again, and who had decided sometime in the last 21 days that this particular stranger was no longer one. "I would like that very much," Harold said. "Thank you." He took off his coat. He hung it on the hook by the door. He followed the small boy and the tall, thin grandfather into a kitchen that smelled like a home, and he sat down at a small table that had been set for 2 and was now, quickly and without comment, being set for 3. And he understood, as he sat, that the house on the hill had burned down for a reason he did not yet have words for, and that the house he was sitting inside now, with its 3 ornaments on its small tree, and its pot of rice on its small stove, and its small boy carefully placing a wooden horse beside his own plate, was in every way that mattered the only house he had left. Outside, the light was already going. It was December, and the days were short. But the windows of the apartment were warm, and the lights inside it were on, and from the sidewalk, if a person had been walking past, they would have seen 3 figures around a small kitchen table, and they would not have known which one of them had saved which, and they would not, looking in, have been able to tell that any of it had ever been any other way. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories about the small acts of courage that change everything, and the unlikely heroes who see what the rest of the world walks past.